the Second Vatican Council, preparing it, of course, giving us the background to the Second Vatican Council, and then later on talking specifically about the concept of ministry. Now we move to the next chapter, chapter 6, which is basically just a kind of recapping in terms of the important points that still needs to be attended to by the church, and that is why we have entitled this Unresolved Issues in the Church, especially in regard to ministry. I have basically taken this from Bernier because I think that his discussion on the unresolved issues is rather thorough and rather, what do you call this, up to date. So I'll go through them quickly. For example, unresolved issue, celibacy question. I know that maybe there have been a pronouncement on the part of the Pope, on the part of the Roman authorities, that the celibacy question is not a matter for debate. But for as long as we don't debate it, it will always be a question. Whether you like it or not, you'll have to face it. Okay. Of course, you all know what is the question, no? Should the priest be celibate? Is celibacy, what do you call this, part of ordination? We always say, of course, that celibacy is a church policy, a church regulation, a church law. There is nothing in the Bible that says that priests have to be celibate. Okay? There's nothing in the Bible that says priests have to be celibate. It's a church regulation, which means if the church can adopt it, it can also change it. And as we have seen already in our discussion, the idea of celibacy attached to the ordained ministry is something that happened much later. Well, people have stressed it in the first millennium, but more so in the second millennium, the council, the Second Lateran Council spoke about this as a rule already in the church. Okay. The official justification, of course, is that when you talk about ministry in terms of, especially priesthood, in terms of the confection of sacraments, in other words, administration of sacraments, then there are a lot of reasons attached to it. For example, cultic purity is something that has to be done, but that also is indicative of some of the preconceptions about morality and what constitutes what do you call this, purity of cultic purity. Does it mean what do you call this, not having relations with the other person is going to mean cultic purity? We do not know. Zachariah was working in the temple, but Zachariah had a wife, Elizabeth. So, what kind of cultic purity are we really talking here about? Now, the question is celibacy a charism? In other words, it's a charism that is attached to priesthood for now, but can we detach it from the priesthood? Well, in fact, there are lay people who have taken, so to speak, the vow of celibacy. Lay people who say, I'm not going to get married, so I'm going to be celibate of my life. That is a charism. Now, why can it not be the same thing with priesthood? Why is celibacy going to be attached always to ministry? If you're going to be ordained minister in the Catholic Church, then you have to be celibate. Whereas the church tradition in other places, like even in the Eastern Church, recognized by Rome, or the Orthodox churches, when you talk about celibacy or their ministers or their priests have children and they have families. They have a wife. The priest, they have a wife. He has a wife, and of course the children. So that is being done in other areas. Why can't the Latin Church or the Western Church not adopt something like that. Okay. There are even people who are speaking about celibacy as a matter of human rights, in a sense that to opt for celibacy is something that only a human being can really make without any coercion from church authorities or from leaders. It's something that you need to embrace as your what do you call it, as your right as a human being. Now, what we need to understand also, this should not be something that we question, that the church, as a church, has a prerogative to make a rule in either way, to accept uh, non-celibate priests or to simply limit priesthood to the celibates. The church has that prerogative. As we have seen through centuries, the church can make kind of a regulation because the church is the church. I mean, we're talking about the church. Church. Hopefully, the church leaders have consulted their constituents. I mean, the members of the church. Okay, but there are actually other factors in regard to the celibacy question. What are those factors? A lot of it is economic. By the way, in the Middle Ages, when they imposed celibacy to the priest, it had to do basically with money issues or hereditary issues, which means they limited the people who will inherit, in a way, whatever property the priest would have. The priest uh, would be supported by the community. Therefore, he would earn by the sweat of his brow. He's going to to earn a kind of a living, but only to the extent that he's able to extend or to do ministry to the rest of the community. Okay, so that's in a way limited, but the church takes care of everything else about the what would happen if the priest had a family? What is going to happen in regard to the property of the priest? If you're a parish priest, and if you have a family, is your family entitled to what is this to inherit some of the things that you have?
No, that's a property of the church, Father.
You're already answering. I'm just posing questions. I'm not asking for answers. I know the answer, but I'm talking about the idea that in celibacy actually is connected with hereditary questions, economic questions, has to do with the church, the economy of the church. Yeah, I mean it's not what do you call it? It's not. It may be too one-sided to speak of it as but actually the economic part is a big consideration in regard to the rule of celibacy. Of course, some people will say, okay, psychologically. At the moment, of course, you are not used to having married clergy. But people in the Eastern Church, for example, they're used to having married clergy. I have seen people in the Eastern Church who had married clergy and their families were coming to the celebration of the parish, etc., etc., etc. Well, the good thing there was that the wife also had another job, so they're able to take care of the family, both from the salary of the priest as well as the salary of the wife. They're able to. But when you talk about other properties, and the church has plenty of properties, other properties, and when you start talking about civil law, you talk about conjugal properties. Where do you draw the line between conjugal property in regard to church properties? Can you imagine all the questions that we will be facing? And there are different, in different places in the world, civil law are different. You go to Africa, for example, the what they call is the law there in terms of marriage, in terms of the what can be inherited by the wife or by the is very different from what we have here or in the Western countries or in Europe or in America. Very very different. Even the whole idea of private property is something that is basically unknown to the native Africans. There's no private property in Africa. Everything is owned by the community. And it's the leader, the chief, that decides who goes where or what particular part of the property he could go. And that's a different matter altogether. Now apply that to what I call this to priests who are in Africa. What's going to happen? Laking gulo yan.
That would be highly problematic, Father.
And that is why the church is insisting on celibacy with the priesthood. There are also, of course, psychological reason for this. So, all I'm saying, I don't want you to tell your bishops and your other formators that I am not in favor of celibacy. I am in favor of what the church says should be the rule. But I think there's a need for us to rethink some things. In terms of psychology, for example, I can tell you that psychological ministry can be very difficult if you talk about celibacy. It's a very, we all know that it's an obvious problem in the church. Priests having mistresses left and right. Where is that coming from? Part of it is psychological. So maybe you are not psychologically prepared to take on celibacy. Who is? And you never know. 20 years from now, after you are ordained after 25 years, you might change your mind. Oh, I need somebody. I need a companion. In my old age, my other priests are not good enough to be my companions in my old age. So where do you go from there? These are all intimacy issues. These are all very, very difficult issues. But you see, all of that. The church has to take into consideration all of these things in order to make a decision on this. It's not just a matter of saying, wow, it's a church law, so you can just change it. There are so many other considerations. Okay? All right. So I will leave it
Father, Father,
yes.
how about those mothers of some parish priests who meddle with the matters of the parish as if ruling higher than the parish priest?
You see, that's already a problem. And the mother is not even married to the priest. Yeah, that's already a problem. But especially in the case of the diocesan priests, where you have, you stay in the parish, and sometimes you don't have a companion. You only have Aurora or you have Rosario. And then what is this? And then over and above that, you have your mother who wants to stay with you because she wants to protect my son, the priest. They protect you from all the Aurora and the Rosario and the Caridad, etc. Okay. Then, of course, it's just one short step going towards other being involved or nakikialam in regard to the, what do you call this, affairs in the church. Big, big question. But that's one. The other,
Father,
yes.
Father, I just wonder if the Orthodox has issues also with regards to mistresses or what, because church marriage is actually part of those before the I think they are allowed, but before diaconate, they have to be married first before going to the diaconate.
Yes.
And I don't know if have more issues than Catholics because maybe a psychological suppressions, maybe because of psychological needs or sexual needs for like that. I don't know if issues like this in the Catholic Church are also the same in the Orthodox.
In regard to psychological needs, they're also the same.
Not
Whether
only
you are
for
married,
priests, Father.
no, whether you are married,
Even
or
marriage.
okay, All right. Whether you are married or not, you'll always have psychological problems.
That's true.
In regard to intimacy, in regard to other things. Okay. But for me, the more important question would be to look at the Orthodox Church and find out the economic part, the hereditary part. How does it work? I think they have very strict rules in the Orthodox Church in regard to who is entitled to a particular the, the, the wealth, or let's say, of the or the resources of the priest, who is entitled to that. I think they have a strict. But you have to remember that they are what do you call this? They also live in a kind of a society where that kind sort of fits into their own framework. But for us, the Roman Catholic Church, when you talk about different cultures and different practices and different traditions all over the world, how are you going to make a rule that is good for everybody without problems? You cannot. So in terms of problems, you can be sure there are problems. But in terms of hereditary problems or hereditary issues, it would be interesting to find. I would not know myself about but I have not heard, probably because I did not really look too deeply about this issue. But that's something that can be considered. And many people have advanced, of course, the argument that if it is something that works in the Orthodox Church, or even in the what you call this non-Latin Rite Church, recognized by Rome, why not? But definitely, I think for many of these Orthodox churches, if you're going to be a bishop, you have to be celibate. Because in most dioceses, the bishop is the what we will call corporation soul. That is why it's very important to choose the right bishop, because the bishop could just easily say, "This is my property. So when I retire, I take all this property with me." By law, he can do that. Why? Because he's a corporation soul. But by canon law, you cannot do that. But has canon law ever prevented bishops to what do you call this, to claim what is not their own? Bishops would say, this is the property, so I'm going to put their subdivisions, okay, and I'm going to have this developed. So all the proceeds of the subdivision goes to me. But that is a diocesan property. How can you? Well, I am the bishop. So I am the corporation. Okay? You talk about this in canon law. All right. The other issue has to do with the people's right to the Eucharist. People have the right to receive the Eucharist or to have the Eucharist celebrated. If there are not enough priests because of celibacy rule, there are not enough priests because of the celibacy rule, what can we do? Well, that is precisely an argument that has been put forward first for married clergy or ordaining married people as priests in order to be able to celebrate the Eucharist, or ordaining women so that they could celebrate the Eucharist. Because priority is for people to have the Eucharist celebrated. But according to our structure, the Eucharist can only be celebrated by the ordained minister. So the all-important concern is be ordained. So why not ordain not just the priest, but also married clergy, but also sisters? That's the argument. It's connected to the argument. But the important point here is in regard to, do we really believe that the people have the right to the Eucharist? Of course they have the right to the Eucharist. The Eucharist should be celebrated because, one, that is who we are. Remember, the expanded idea of the church had this implication that the Eucharist should be made accessible to the people anytime. That is why no group can say, sorry, this Mass is only for our special group. You cannot come to this Eucharist. The church doesn't approve of that. The church does not agree with that. The Eucharist, anybody can come to the Eucharist. Okay? So there is nobody who can say to, to politicians who are known, let's say, public sinners, you cannot come to the Eucharist. No, you can come to the Eucharist. I can prevent you from receiving communion, yes, but you cannot prevent me from going to the Eucharist if I am a Christian, because you have the right to the Eucharist. Okay, so now the ideal, of course, is that there's a priest in every community who can celebrate the Eucharist, and really make the people experience the beautiful sense of being a church, celebrating the Eucharist. But there are not enough priests. Here in the Philippines, a parish priest is a parish priest of how many people? Between 15, 20, 30,000. How can that one person be available to everybody? So we will have a church where everybody can come. And, okay, not even 20% of the population of a particular parish, they come to church every Sunday. How much more if everybody would come to the church? How big a church are we going to make? Or how many masses would the priest have to say in order to make sure that everybody has access to the Eucharist? Those are some of the things that we need to understand in regard to the ministry. This is connected to the ministry because, of course, if the people have the right to the Eucharist, then it's the obligation of the church leaders, to provide ministers who would celebrate the Eucharist. So, who do you call? Why don't you ordain married priests? Okay. Another area of unresolved area is the structure of ministry, structures of ministry. Of course, we need to ask, is there another way by which we can do ministry other than the hierarchically ordered tradition? Is there another way? What is the role of the community? Is it going to be strengthened in such a way that the community is the subject and not always the object of ministry? Subject means we are the celebrants. When the priest is the celebrant, he is the presider. The appropriate word for it is the presider. Presiding at our Eucharist is Father so-and-so, not the celebrant, because we are all celebrants. All the community, all the baptized are celebrants in the Eucharist. But there is a presider. The presider is the priest, the one who is there, who is conducting the Eucharist. So Bernard Cook, one of our present-day contemporary theologian, made suggestions. Why don't we form a community, strengthen the formation of community, so that we in a way we talk about the community being the group that makes the decision, and not just the priest, not just the leaders, but the community. If you have a good community of people who are very much attuned to what the church is supposed to do, what's supposed to to engage in, then the community will decide. Okay, it will be endorsed by the leader, yes, but it's the community that decides. And when that happens, the community really becomes the community that controls its own life. It's the subject of ministry, not just the object, not just on the receiving end of ministry. Okay, receiving end of the ministry by the priest. Okay. Or creating a more appreciation for the ministry of the word. While reading more the scriptures, discussing the scriptures, living the scriptures. The Biblia Rasal, or the sharing of biblical reflection is something that's being done now in many different churches and many BEs. And this is something that is already coming about. That way, you're also creating the growth of the community or ministry to human needs, the needs outside of the outside of the spiritual needs or the sacramental needs. Ministry of, for example, moral issues. This has to do with reconciliation mostly. And of course, the ministry, regular ministry of the sacraments. Now, there are dangers, of course, as we have already seen in the past, the clericalization of some ministries. Some of the ministers that we now have, for example, some of the readers, they now have a special vestment. If you're a reader, you have this kind of it looks like a surplice, but it's a modified kind of a surplice to distinguish you from the rest of the community. I find it a little bit odd, because then you start making in the community. For me, the basic distinction is the presider and the rest of the community. Okay, I can understand the deacon because he's the helper, and then why cannot we just have altar servers who are, what is this? Who are dressed in ordinary clothes? I mean, in good clothes. I mean, but it doesn't have to be, little priests. They don't have to be little priests. The sacristan don't have to be little priests. Okay, or the brothers, the seminarians who will be future priests. Okay, I can understand sometimes on certain occasions, like let's say big occasions, fiestas or ordination, we have to have some vestments. But ordinary days, ordinary Sunday, why do we need to make so much distinction? Oh, siya, special siya. Kasi usher siya, or greeter siya, or reader siya, or commentator siya, or taga-collecta siya, etc., etc. So mayroon siyang special attire. Oh, to give importance to the God. Okay. Why not just do it with like an ordinary person? So that everybody will say, oh, it's possible to be done. I can also volunteer to do the same kind of thing. In other words, democratizing some of our ministries. When you try to clericalize or try to separate the ministers from the non-ministers, in other words, not actual ministers, because we are all ministers by reason of baptism, but actual ministers in a particular sacramental celebration. When you make so many distinctions, you start talking about different levels, higher level. Oh, yung Mother Butler Guild is on this level. Yung other one would be this level. Oh, pag nakakuha ka na, naging sacristan ka na, okay. Or if you're holding the turibol, then you have a higher level of being sacristan. Yon, hierarchicalization na naman. That's what happens. And then, clericalization. Huwag na tayo magtaka pa kung it will again move to that. All I'm saying is that ordinary people, and that's why I have nothing against young girls serving in the altar. Why not? And even dressed in ordinary way. I mean, in nice formal way, but ordinary clothes. Doesn't have to be wearing all kinds of other things. Anyway, that's my idea. Women in the church. I will not discuss this much because we will be discussing this but it is an issue that is a prevailing issue until now. The role of women in the church. Unofficially, the church has always had a role in the church, more perhaps than not more than the priest, of course, but have been in many other ways they have been doing that. But you notice already that the Pope had already appointed one sister who would be part of the Roman congregation, the Roman Curia.
Yeah.
Little by little. Okay. So I will not discuss this. Mutual recognition of ministers or ministries. This is in regard to ecumenism, of course. Let's some hard questions. Can a Protestant minister consecrate the Eucharist? Or can we receive communion in their churches? Do their masses count? These are some of the questions that Father Bernie had presented, which are in the minds of many people, especially when they're talking about ecumenical sessions. are some official declarations on the part of the different churches on agreements about how do we about the Eucharist and about baptism. On these two sacraments alone, there's already some pretty good agreement. Like receiving communion either way it's allowed. Although Catholics would have much more hesitance in receiving communion in Protestant churches, but the Protestant churches do not have any. Many of them do not have any problem receiving communion in the Catholic Church. Another area in regard to ecumenism, and this one has to do with ministry, apostolic succession. Exactly how do we interpret apostolic succession? You probably will discuss this in your ecclesiology course, but apostolic succession has been claimed, let's say, especially by the Roman Catholic Church, as there is an unbroken, what they call this transfer of power from the apostles all the way to the current bishops now. Well, if you study history at all, you will find that there are certain times when that did not happen. But do we still claim that there was apostolic succession? Yes, because apostolic succession can be interpreted in a different way, not just in what we call the physical handing over of ordination. Like you were ordained by the bishop who was ordained by so-and-so, who was ordained by so-and-so, etc., going all the way back to Peter and the other disciples. Can you really do that? I don't think so. But anyway, another way of interpreting apostolic succession is that you are faithful to the faith of the apostles. In other words, what did the apostles believe? You also believe. That is apostolic succession. But that is a very broad, what we call this, perspective of apostolic succession. Is that what we mean when we say apostolic? I believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church. Okay, because other churches who are ordained legitimate bishops, they have the what we would call the sacrament of orders, legitimate sacrament of orders recognized by the church. So, what separates us from them? That's the question. Priestly spirituality. Bernier is of the mind that we need to go beyond what we would call the French school of spirituality, which, as we have discussed in the previous sessions, had to do more with the idea of a more individual, cultic-centered kind of spirituality. And as I said, much of what we in the Vincentian community had inherited was precisely that. A lot of emphasis on the cultic and the individual, private. Our number one, what they call is the aim of the congregation, according to Saint Vincent in the Common Rules, is to seek one's perfection, which is very individual. But that is because of the emphasis on the individual by the French school of spirituality. So Saint Vincent was a product of his time. That was the perspective. Nowadays, of course, when we start talking about spirituality, it's not just my own person, it's our own community. Me growing as a spiritual person in the context of the community. So the community has much to do with my growth in development in spirituality. So it's a much broader. It's in my opinion, it's much more communitarian and much more Eucharistic kind of a spirituality. And a problematic area was that priests were considered to be living a special state of life. Oh, when you become a priest, you are in a different level already. You're a different person now. So your parents will no longer touch you. Or your parents and your uncles and your grandmothers will kiss your hand already because you're a priest. Okay, I can understand. I can understand the tradition behind it. I can understand it. But also sometimes that just, what is this? What is my the expression I have? that just polishes the ego of the priest. It polishes the ego of the priest when you put too much emphasis on that different style. I have no problem with the idea that it's a different state of life. Yes, whether it's a special state of life, I don't know. I don't consider it a special state of life. It's my state of life, my state. But married life, isn't that a special state of life also? It is equally a special state of life. So what makes priest different from God? Now, according to Van Balthasar, contemporary of Rahner, Schillebeeckx, etc., spirituality is a person's basic existential attitude and approach to life. So much broader than simply Venus, like rosaries, like etc. No, spirituality is more than that, more than meditation, more than prayer, individual prayer. Spirituality is your own life, how you conduct yourself, how you behave in relation to God, in relation to other people. So it means it's a religious and an ethical outlook. So priestly spirituality is a spirituality that creates this bond, this relationship between God and people. And I think when the diocesan seminarians start talking about diocesan spirituality, you really have to think seriously about this. Your spirituality cannot be separated from your contact with the people. The best way to develop and to grow in your spirituality as diocesan priests, future diocesan priests, is if you were to lend yourself completely at the service of the people, but also develop your spirituality in your service, in the way that you serve the people. That is the spirituality. Talk about the Ignatian spirituality of people who go to San Jose, or the Dominican spirituality of those people who go to what is this, to UST, or the Vincentian spirituality for those who come to SVST. Okay, you have to develop your own spirituality in the context of your own ministry in the parish, your pastoral ministry in the parish. That's where you develop your ministry. Okay, you want to say cure de ars, you want to, okay, that's only one particular part, confession, hearing confession. That's one. Anybody who has heard confession is something that, I always appreciate hearing confession, because it's something that is always very special to me. But difficult thing when you have to listen to the problems of people for 1 hour, 2 hours, and if you are very serious about it, poof, my God, you carry with you all their problems. I don't want to belittle the role of the priest, but some people have said that priests have become the garbage dump of the problems of people. Now, of
The
course,
worst, Father, is that when they want to become Salvador del Mundo.
yes, but they are people who what is this who who some priests who keep all of those problems within themselves, and that is a very good recipe for heart attack. So that's why you have to know how to listen, at the same time give advice, etc., and separate yourself from the problems that you hear. Because
Psycho-spiritual, Father.
you have plenty of suggestions today, Al. Okay, spirituality today: ecclesial, incarnational, service-oriented, towards the world, and liberational. Okay, you will talk more about this in your own. Desiderata for ministry or on ministry. We need people who can preside over the church as a community. Ordained or not, doesn't matter. The church as a community. Someone who can preside over a community formed by the Word of God. we are rooted in the Word of God. A community that is a prophetic ministry, able to proclaim the good news as well as the not so good news. A minister who presides over a nurturing community, a community that nurtures each other, one another. We heal one another, or we give access to the healing power that is within all of us. And of course, somebody who would preside over a community that always serves, that seeks to serve. And that's why we have that beautiful song. Seguir amando, tari, la ra ri ra ra